One of my kids has been coming home and talking about their friend being non-binary. I know that as a parent, I should be up with all this terminology, but I'm still struggling to get my head around it and would love a bit of guidance.
Just a Sec Education acknowledges the Wurundjeri and Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation as the traditional custodians and the original educators of the lands on which this podcast is recorded. We recognise that this land was never ceded. A few disclaimers before we jump in. This is a sexuality education podcast. For this series, our content will be aimed at parents of 8 to 12-year-olds. Naturally, we'll be talking about bodies, puberty, sex, porn, and other related topics, so please use your judgment when playing it aloud. Hello and welcome to Let's Talk, a podcast by Just a Sec. I'm your host, Fran Folkes-Taylor, and I'm a sexologist, I'm a dietitian, and I'm the founder of Frank Sexology, where I provide sexuality education in Geraldton, Western Australia. Many people feel a level of confusion when it comes to understanding gender. You may have heard comments such as, "Oh, it's all just so confusing these days." This has been particularly pertinent in the last decade when social media has provided a platform to educate and raise awareness about gender. If you've had these same thoughts, that's okay. But it's also important that parents and carers take the time to learn about gender. Why? Because gender identity is everybody's business. Now, to help us navigate all things gender, today in the studio we have with us Dotahn, Caspi and Budi Sudarto. Welcome. So Budi is the founder and director of Ananda Training and Consultancy, a boutique agency specialising in intersectionality, equity and justice. They have a background in health promotion and peer education and works as a casual research assistant at the Melbourne Sexual Health Centre and Monash University. Welcome, Budi.
Thank you, Fran.
Dotahn Caspi is a father of a 7-year-old, works in technology for a national non-profit and is a video artist in his spare time. Dotahn is passionate about technology for purpose and daddy-daughter art collaborations. Welcome, Dotahn.
Thanks for having me.
No worries. So we're going to kick things off with a question that we ask all of our guests at the beginning of the episode, and that's, who is your sex ed hero?
Well, sex education when I was growing up wasn't very good, but thinking back, I would have to say my mother would be my sex ed hero, purely because she modelled body positivity, and I think made me comfortable in myself and taught me the basics, and which I appreciate.
Yeah. Oh, that's lovely. I'm sure she'd be very happy with that response. And Budi, what about you?
I'm struggling to find one person. I think there's a collective of people that are my heroes. Having background in health promotion, having encountered so many passionate, dedicated people to talk about sexuality and sex education. So I have to give it to the plethora of professionals and sexologists, including yourself. They just keep breaking the boundaries with each conversation.
We've had a response like that before. It's not necessarily just one person, it's a combination of all those people. So just to recap from previous episodes, Budi, can you tell us what's the difference between gender and sex?
Okay, I just have to frame it in a way that a lot of people can understand it. So the way I explain to people, sex is when we were born, when all of us were born. And usually the first thing that people ask is it a boy or a girl?
Yeah.
And they make that decision based on what's appeared from the outside. So the genitalia. So if someone has a penis, then it's a boy. Someone has a vulva, it's a girl. Now, of course, we also have babies that are born with intersex variations. So where the external genitalia may not fit with either a penis or a vulva, or sometimes it's internal as well. So that's how I explain to people. So just think about what's the outside, the genitalia, what's the downstairs. Now that's someone's sex. When it comes to gender, it's a bit more complicated, isn't it? And again, I like to refer it to when I was about to be an uncle for the first time. And regardless of all the education, all the activism, the advocacy work that I've done, what was the first question that I asked my sister-in-law? Of course. When she was pregnant, immediately, is it a boy or a girl? And she just looked at me like, are you the right person to ask that question? And I'm like, no, I'm sorry. Because we started associating someone's gender based on the genitalia. And we started thinking about, okay, if it's a boy, does it mean that I have to buy all the blue stuff? If it's a girl, does it mean that I start buying the pink stuff? When I was a child, I was told that I gravitated towards yellow. So I think that's explained why I'm non-binary because it's neither blue or pink. So gender is very much a social script, very much what we told ourselves about what someone's gender should be like based on that external sex or genitalia. And it can be confusing for people to understand it too, because we have been taught from a very early on that there's only two gender. Penis blue boy, vulva pink girl. And this is where conversation about gender, people are a little bit reluctant to have, because it means that we have to question everything that's been taught to us since day one, since the day we were born.
Thank you for that. And are you able to expand on that a bit, Budi, as well, in terms of giving us specific examples of gender where someone's sex might not necessarily be the same as their gender?
Yeah, so I think I'm an example of that. So I was born a male. I was born with male genitalia. I was born with a penis, and I was assigned as a boy because of the external, because of the downstairs bit. With that label as a boy, there is. I'm from Indonesia, so there's a cultural element that attached to it. The idea of masculinity, the idea of you are only to play with certain toys because you're a boy. You're only allowed to wear certain type of clothing because you are a boy. You're only allowed to behave in a way that is seen as masculine and non-feminine because you're a boy. And that in itself is an example about how we keep recreating this idea of gender stereotypes based on the external, based on what we can see from the outside. And people's gender are varied. There's so many different types of gender. I'm non-binary myself, so I don't conform to the idea of masculine or feminine, regardless of what I have underneath. Regardless of what my external genitalia might be. Then we have people who are trans, who born with, let's say, a male or female sex characteristics or genitalia, but deep down inside they know that that's not their gender. Deep down inside they know that the gender identity that speaks to who they are as a person is different to what appears from the outside. And I really hate to admit that even in this day and age, with all the education, the information available to us, we are still following the same pattern because that's what's comfortable for us. As I said before earlier, I make that mistake as well. Because we all do, because that's what we know and that's what we feel comfortable with. So as you said, friend, in the beginning, I think that's the first thing that parents and carers need to be aware of, is our willingness to challenge our own understanding. And it can take times. It won't happen overnight.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I think it's reinforced by so many aspects of society that it can be difficult to think outside of that.
Yeah.
I know as a parent from a very young age, clothes, toys, all reinforce a binary gender, right? And when discussing gender with my child when she was young, it was difficult to explain the spectrum of gender when culturally it's still a binary. Choices of what shows to watch, what clothes to wear, don't take into account that kind of spectrum.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because we say that everything is binary, but at the same time, we are also an actor in there. You know, we are also subconsciously reinforcing that idea of binary, as you said, because it's all over, it's around us. So the conversation will be, how can we slowly break down that binary? Because when I'm reflecting back on my nieces when they grew up, they really didn't care.
Kids don't.
Kids don't. They see something that they like, they pick it up, and they're like, I want to play with this. And it's us. It's us who put the stop to it based on our understanding of gender.
And just for our listeners, can we define that term binary? What's meant by binary, just so that people understand?
You mentioned it, so you can explain it.
To me, it's binary is only two. So binary means that there are only, two genders. So it's male and female only.
One or the other.
It's,
and in terms of if someone identifies as non-binary, what does that sort of necessarily mean?
Well, first and foremost, there is no one definition of what non-binary should look like or should think or should behave. Each one of us have our own understanding about our gender and what it meant for us to be non-binary. So for me, being non-binary is more about the idea that I do not conform to either just masculine or feminine. And I never never conformed to that idea of masculinity because I was born as a male. At the same time, I'm not trans because I do not want to transition my gender. You know, that's just not who I am as a person. So for me, being non-binary is playing around with that idea of masculinity and femininity and presenting myself in a way that feels comfortable at the time. And that's for me, that's the key, you know, time and context. There will be time where I will feel slightly more towards the masculine side or slightly more towards the feminine side. And that's completely fine. And there'll be times like today when I just right stuck in the middle. That's completely fine as well. So for me, that the idea of non-binary is just not conforming to what you said, either masculine or feminine. So we are in the middle and we play around with it.
And in terms of society, I think we sort of mentioned before that society is more set up for a binary sometimes, or not always supportive of that spectrum. Would it be correct to say that? Do you think that society isn't always supportive of a spectrum?
Yes, a very easy example to give is the use of public toilet. I often use the male toilet because you got urinals and it's easier to use, and usually there's no queue. So, so anyone who ever used a female toilet understand the frustration of just waiting outside, holding your pee. And the number of times, I lost count, the number of times where someone else would walk in and did a double check. Did they enter the right toilet? Because they saw me. And they saw me washing my hand. They saw me like in urinals. They saw me waiting for the cubicle. And they just gone, hang on a second, where am I? This is supposed to be a male toilet, but then I got someone who doesn't appear as conventionally, traditionally male or appear masculine. So simple things like that is an indication that, yes, our society has been set up. And reinforcing this idea, you're either a male or a female. And if you do not follow any of those, you are immediately an outsider. You are the strange one. You know, you don't really belong here. Clothing, walk to any kind of shops and you'll see boys section, girls section, men's section, women's section. I just want to find clothes that fit.
Fair enough. Yeah. And then we talked a bit about transgender before, but what is cisgender?
I'll let you explain that.
Okay, I'll try. So, cisgender, I believe, if I'm explaining it correctly, cisgender means that your gender identity is the same as the sex that you were assigned at birth. Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
that's the way I like to explain it.
It's a good way to explain it, and sometimes I explain it to people. If your downstairs match with the upstairs, then you are cisgender. If your downstairs doesn't match with the upstairs, then you are either trans, non-binary, or gender diverse. I mean,
It's a nice, simple way
Good way
to
to
explain
explain
it.
it. And if people can't, who aren't watching but they're listening, you're pointing to your brain.
yes.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. Just to clarify. Yeah. So I just want to take this moment to talk about the acronym LGBTQIA+. A lot of people sort of find that a tough acronym or don't understand it, and they're like, oh, too many letters. But can we just unpack that a bit? So we've talked about the T, so the transgender. What are the other letters?
Have a go.
There's no pressure.
I could have a
Dotahn.
go. I must admit, I don't know what the A is referring to. I believe I understand the others. So the L is referring to lesbian. So someone who identifies as female who is attracted to other people who are female. Then G is referring to gay, which refers to someone who identifies as male who's attracted to other people who identify as male. B, bisexual, someone who is sexually attracted to people who identify as male or people who identify as female. T, we covered trans. Q, queer is, I believe, more of a blanket term for those who don't identify or aren't heterosexual. Is that
you want to
is
expand
that
on that
yeah?
bit
Is there a better
queer?
definition for queer or?
Queer is one of those words that has no singular definition.
Yeah,
So the
that's
way
what I
you
thought.
explain it is one of the definition. So anyone who is not heterosexual and anyone who's not cisgender either.
Okay.
So
Yeah,
the word queer.
course.
Yeah.
That's a better way
And
to
it can also
explain
be
it.
questioning in some contexts.
In
as
some
well.
contexts, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then the I is, I believe, referring to intersex.
Yep. Oh, so we did talk
Yeah,
about
we
that.
talked a little bit.
Covered
And
the
I don't know A.
That's
So
okay.
yeah.
A is for asexual. So
Of
course.
Yeah. So
Okay.
Budi, did you want to cover what asexual?
Yeah, so the A stands for asexual and aromantic. So the A
Okay.
and arrow. The asexuals are people who have none to very little sexual attraction to someone else. And the aromantic is people who have very little to no romantic attractions to someone else. And the term asexual is often confused with celibacy.
Yeah.
Right? A lot of people said, oh, well, asexual is the same as people who just celibate or people who are abstaining from sex. That is a myth.
Yeah.
For the asexual people that I have spoken to, they said to me, look, it is just who we are. It's that innate feeling that we know from a very young age. Well, everyone else are talking about people who have crushes with, talking about sex in schools. It's just something that they didn't relate with. Aromantic is also been. Some people said to me, "Well, aromantic is just people who can't commit." I just have to say to them, "Well, no, because you can't commit is a choice, but you still have the romantic attractions. You just don't want to commit." Well, again, from the arrow people that I have spoken to, they said, look, it's just not within us. We just do not have that desire to establish that romantic connection with other people. Again, asexual and aromantic means completely different from one person to another. And for us, it's just more understanding that if someone said to us, I'm asexual, then we do not put a judgment on that, or we do not make assumption about who they are as a person. And the same thing with aromantic as well. So it's more about taking it on the face value, having that knowledge that, okay, well, you're not sexually attracted to anyone, you're not romantically attracted to anyone, and that's all I need to know.
Okay. So that's different from celibacy, because celibacy is a choice to not engage in sexual activity, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
There's the difference.
And I think society generally is not very accepting of people that are asexual or aromantic. It's not represented in media or,
I mean, you know, we're talking about our target audience here with parents and carers. Again, I make that mistake as well when I just ask my nieces, is there anyone in the school that you like? And I'm just kind of pinch myself and go, hang on a second, they might be asexual, they might be aromantic, but why is it me, the one with all this knowledge, still asking that question? Because it is so socially prescribed, it is so socially normalized for us to ask young children, is there anyone in school that you like? You still playing with that person, do you like that person? Instead of just asking them, I see you like that. You like to play with A or with a B or with a C. Is that your friends? Is that people that you want to be friends with? But our brain just immediately think, oh, they must be liking each other. They must have big baby crushes.
And even assumptions about their sexuality as well. Often there might be assumption, a girl that's like, oh, any boys you like, and that's another assumption that you have to pull yourself up on, that heterosexual, and what about the plus in LGBTQIA plus?
The plus is because we ran out of space. we just and it's great thing, because I do this as part of my work. A lot of people said, oh, there are just too many labels these days. It's just confusing. And I like to remind people, it's great that there are so many labels that people can choose from, because then we don't make people feel that they have to conform or follow what we know. They have more freedom to explore, more freedom to identify with a group of people that are similar to them. And that's where the plus come in. So that could be someone who's pansexual, demisexual, omnisexual. Oh God, I failed the exam now. Gray sexual, that's another one that I heard the other day, and I still don't know what that meant. But that's where the plus is in, because as we all kind of recognize, human sexuality and relationship are so diverse, and yet for centuries we have confined it to either heterosexual or gay. We forgot about the damage that it actually can cause to a person when they feel that they have to choose one or the other in order for them to feel a sense of connection and belonging. So I think it's great to have that pluses. I don't know all the pluses, and I'm okay with that.
Okay.
So it's basically just an umbrella term for everything else that's not the sexual orientations and gender identities that's not included with that LGBTQIA.
Yes, and relationships as well.
Relationships. Of course. And so in terms of teaching our kids about sex and gender, how do we go about this?
Well, I guess I'm still learning. So I'm a parent of a 7-year-old. I'm just starting to think about how we start to talk about sexuality. When it comes to gender, I guess I'm lucky in the sense that I've gone through my own journey of learning. My sibling is non-binary, and it's been kind of a big learning curve for me to adopt all the new language and with, pronouns and gender identity and sexuality, and to really ingrain that in the way I speak. I'm trying my best. But in doing that, learning myself, it's been a lot easier to then introduce that language very early for my daughter. So from a very young age, she knew that there wasn't just male and female, that gender was a spectrum and that people didn't have to conform, which I think was great. And about the different type of terms, I still don't know how to broach the sexuality subject. I'd love to get some tips. But despite having, I think, introduced that language early and having consistent discussions about it, we still see the gender binary being enforced and these stereotypes coming up with clothing or, questions about, I thought girls could only marry boys, those kind of questions still come up because I recognise not everyone is exposed so early to that language.
Of course. And Boo, did you have any, recommendations in terms of how to have these conversations with kids?
So I'm an uncle of 2 nieces, and I think the conversation, the easiest conversation to have is by not punishing them, or punishing is probably not the right word, but I can't think of another word at the moment. Reprimanding or making negative comments when a child pick up a toy that traditionally doesn't align with their gender, and I think that's the most damaging thing that we can do as an adult, is to actually say to a child, no, you are this is what you should play with.
Don't
it's
wear
not
that,
for you.
Don't,
Don't play in that. Or the classic case of, well, if you're a boy and you fell, then you don't cry. And studies have shown that it actually stunted men's emotional growth because we are repressing it. Don't cry, don't cry, don't cry. And I'm still repressing it right now. That's the legacy of it. For female children, not given toys that actually develop their motor skills. They being directed towards a more nurturing kind of toys, like so dolls, all that. And again, studies have shown that actually limit their motor development. Right? So I know toys sound simple, but the long-term impact is actually contributing to the recreation or the reproduction of gender stereotypes. So that's the simple thing that we can do. A child pick up a toy, we just let them play with it. And I don't know about your daughter, but I know with my nieces, they pick up a toy and I was playing with them, and an hour later they got bored with it and they move on with something else. I'm like, and it's more me being tired, like I really want a nap, but okay, you still want to play. You want to play this. You want to do this. And again, I think that's the thing about gender. It's just introducing it from a very young age, that something doesn't have to be so scripted, that they are free to express it the way they want to express it. It's always the outsider that making it even more complicated, isn't it?
That's what I've found. So an example that I remember is my daughter loves playing video games. Her favourite game is Kirby, which is back from when I was a kid as well. But Kirby doesn't have a gender. And my daughter has always referred to Kirby as them, they, them. But then whenever it's translated into English, they always put a gender. She's frustrated by that. Because it's like, Kirby's not supposed to be a man. And the same with conversations at school, despite the fact that we've introduced the spectrum of gender early, she's corrected by friends or teachers or to keep reinforcing that binary. It's hard.
It's hard, and we have to start thinking about what is that impact of being constantly told that, no, you shouldn't think like that, you shouldn't behave like that, to a child's development, to the way that child understand who they are as a person, but also understand their peers and the world around them. And I think that's something that we haven't really discuss much because we are still focusing on how do I talk about this topic to my child and not realizing that whatever we're telling that child, we are also part of society that tells us something else. So we need to start thinking about who's around my circle that share the same values and same thinking as me, and think about using these individuals, other parents, carers, uncles, aunties, as that protective barrier. So when they are keep constantly being bombarded by the script, then they go home, they got confused. That's when you bring the village in.
There's reinforcement. Yeah. It's not just the parents saying one thing and the rest of the world saying something else.
Yeah. And if, say, a parent of, say, a 10-year-old is listening to this at the moment and is thinking like, maybe I could have done better in terms of talking about gender or sex, or not necessarily better, but maybe I didn't address it, or they feel a bit out of their depth maybe around these topics, are there sort of some good resources or ways that they can start to educate themselves, or tools that they can use with educating their children?
Yeah, look, I haven't found a great source of resource or a specific book. I think what is difficult is while we find one, maybe we might find one picture book, which is great, and talks about gender in a way which is age appropriate and connects with our child. That's one book out of the 100 books that they're reading, which just reinforce the binary. So that's what we've struggled with a little bit. It's, challenging. I don't know of a specific resource. Do you know any?
Oh, look, I think there are a few just on top of my head. So Transcend is an organization for parents of transgender diverse children. And I believe they have some resources on their website specifically to parents to help them understand this. I know Minus 18 has some resources. It was written for young people, but it is so easy. The language they use is so simple that anyone can pick it up and just update their knowledge. There is a model that I use in my training, the gender unicorn model, and I like using it because it has 3 categories. The sex, downstairs, the gender, how we feel, the upstairs, the brain, and the heart, the sexuality. Very simple, easy to understand, and also available in other languages. That's always a bonus for me. Like anything available in other languages, they got a big tick for me. But I think the most, not the most, but one of the good resources is coming from talking to other parents. Just because that peer-to-peer connections, and as you said, Fran, it can help people not to feel guilty. It can help people to feel that they're not alone. And Dotahn, you mentioned that earlier. A lot of the time parents feel that they're on their own. They're on their own navigating this complex world. When they have a child, they grew up in a culture that's completely different to us. Having that parents coming together, parents that with shared thinking, values, also ideology, that's the best way to learn, because then you learn together and you make a mistake and you learn together how to fix it or how to overcome it.
And you can just Google the gender unicorn as well, can't you? And it'll just come up.
There's a lot, and there's a lot of videos out there.
I came across this wonderful YouTube series called Queer Kid Stuff, and it's just a TV show for kids that sort of goes through all these terms and it's like a play school kind of thing. It's brilliant. So I would recommend that parents check that out on YouTube. Yeah. And are sex and gender sort of covered in this way in schools?
Well, what I found is that it's not covered early enough. I think that, I can only speak for my experience of a public primary school, where they rely on external companies to come in and deliver a specific program about whether it be gender or sexuality, and that's often a lot later. We haven't encountered it yet. My daughter is in grade 1. They do have a program which looks at body safety, which covers some of those topics, but it is a very small part.
Yeah, I didn't go to school here, so I couldn't really comment. One thing that I can comment is, as you said, Dotahn, it really depends on each school on how they're going to approach the subject. So here in the inner city Melbourne, then some schools are a bit more progressive than there are schools in the other suburbs or even in the regional areas. And I think you find that, friend, with your work in WA, you know, that you can have really progressive school and the kids will be so informed, empowered. And you go one suburb away and it's a completely different story.
That's true.
And I think that's part of the problem is our education is not consistent, the education system. And in the era where communication is very easy, it's very easy to communicate, to connect with people through social media, I fear that's where disagreement, controversy, a lot of the fraction is because we don't have that consistent messaging. So someone will say it's completely fine to be trans, and then you got 10 other people saying no, because that's what they grew up with, that's what they've been told. I mean, we want to create a cohesive society, but if there is no consistency, how can we do that?
Yeah, we've noticed that we are in a city. It's fairly progressive, public school, but one of my daughter's friends goes to a private school in the same area, getting completely different messaging. And so, yeah, consistency, I think, is an issue.
Yeah. And not being afraid of approaching the subject either. It's a very difficult subject to approach. That's why we're having this conversation. But we are afraid, then we are not doing our kids justice. Again, they grew up attached to their handphone, right? They grew up attached to their tablet and iPad and whatever else they used. And as much as I can reflect on my nieces, as much as my brother and my sister-in-law trying to put a filter on it doesn't always work, right? No. And they're getting a lot of messages. And some of those messages are positive. Some of them are not so positive. If we don't have that consistency and we don't have that bravery to talk to the young people and the children, then they're getting a lot of these conflicting messages. And which one are they going to follow? You know, I am hoping beyond belief that we have raised my nieces in a way that they actually be more open, welcoming to people. But that's a prediction. It's not going, I don't know what's going to happen in about 5-10 years' time.
Yeah.
Again, the only thing that we can do is just having that consistent messaging.
Yeah. Now, just to talk a little bit about pronouns, we've mentioned them a little bit, but are we able to just, for the listeners, define sort of what pronouns are and why they're important to use the correct pronouns?
Pronouns, for me, was probably one of the hardest to kind of relearn. It was the one where I most often made mistakes with my non-binary sibling, and I think my parents found it even harder. We weren't brought up with that language, and so it was a big learning curve. It also had the most immediate kind of negative impact when we get it wrong. And so often we found it was, I guess, scary. And rather than make mistakes, move on, those mistakes would become a big deal. And I think the best advice I got when we were really struggling with getting the correct pronouns, my sibling said to me one day, all you need to do is think of me not as a person, think of me as a swarm of bees, as a collective, and that way I use that trick to this day of thinking of a collective because growing up without that language, the terms they or them would refer to a collective rather than an individual. And so I found that very difficult to get over. But that being said, I get it right most of the time now. I think I'm pretty good at it. But I think it's one of the hardest because it is the most, I guess, direct reference to an individual gender for a person. So a pronoun is one of the only times we are directly referring to someone's gender in conversation. So it has the biggest impact on that person if we are assigning the wrong gender in language, which I understand, very difficult.
It's one of those topics that is all over the place. And one of those topics that some people use it against us, and they're using the old, in the English language, there's only he and she, and there's only two pronouns in the English language. And I like to remind people actually language evolved. Otherwise, we won't be able to say the internet. We won't be able to say a lot of things that we just say naturally now. And that policing of gender as well usually starts with pronoun, as you said. If you have a young child who say to their parents or their siblings or their people around them, I'm actually a they now, quite often the response will be, no, you're not. You are this, right? And that can be so damaging to a child's development of being told from a very young age, no, you can't be something that is not comfortable for us. We're more comfortable using he and she or he and him, her. Again, English is also my second language, so even I got confused between he, she, him, her. I'm like, oh, hang on, which one is which, right? But we think about the child's development here. When we say no to them, when they have the bravery to tell us who they are as a person, my heart breaks for that child. And again, it's usually us that create that environment. So the way I invite people to use pronouns is to think about the time where people say to you, no, you're not that. All of us have been told that at some stage in our life. No, you can't be a pilot. No, you can't be this. No, you can't be that. And just think about that time and think about how that make you feel. It make me feel like I am not valued. It make me feel like I'm an outsider. It make me feel that who I am, what I want to do is inherently wrong. Remember that feeling and then apply it when you refuse to address someone using their pronoun. Right. Do we want to recreate the feeling of harm? Do we want to make someone else feel like an outsider the way we felt when someone said that we can't do something or we can't be someone? If the answer is no, then why are we keep doing it? Why are we keep reproducing the harm that we experience ourselves? So when someone says to us, this is my pronoun, instead of asking them why, are you sure? Especially with a child, because children these days are savvy. They know. Like, I'm a they. I'm like, okay. Instead of questioning them, we just ask them. So is that what you want us to use? Be like, yep. All right, done.
Cool. Yeah.
Until 3 months later, it's like, no, I want to go back to being this. Is that what you want us to use? Done. Move on. Right? So it's always about appreciating and also respecting the other person, because that's what we do as human beings. And especially with children, we want to teach them respect. But we can't teach them respect if we ourselves is not respectful of people's pronouns and how they want to be addressed.
And for those people listening that might be adjusting to the language and they have misgendered someone and used the wrong pronouns, like, what is the best thing to do in that instance?
I do it all the time. I do it the other day. I'm like, I'm really sorry. And that's all you can do.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, misgendered you. and then just move on. And people are actually quite, people accept it when you genuinely apologize. People can understand it. It's a new language that keeps on evolving, and we understand it. I understand it. People misgender me using the wrong pronoun. I understand it to a degree. Right? But if people deliberately misgendering someone, now that's the problem.
That's different.
That's different.
Yeah.
And like you said, Dotahn, when people suddenly make it about them, I'm really sorry, I didn't mean it. I love you, but it's just so difficult for me because everything that's going on in the world right now. No, we do not need to hear your sad story, right? We just want you to say, I'm sorry, and then move on. So don't make it about yourself. Acknowledge your mistake and then move on. And then address the person using the pronoun that that person want us to use.
Something that I've tried to do, and I don't know if this is the right thing to do, is until someone tells me what their pronouns are, I tend to use they, them. One, because it helps me practice, and the other is I can't assume. Is that reasonable? Without someone telling you what their pronouns are, what is the best approach?
I got two ways to approach this. One is if my first contact is through emails, I always look at the bottom of the email. So like, okay, what pronouns are they using? Scrolling. There you go. That's their pronoun. Okay, so I know what to do now. If it is someone that I just met, I don't necessarily start the conversation by asking what's your pronoun. Right? I just kind of have that initial conversation first, build that rapport and build that trust as well.
Okay.
And then I will quietly turn to that person and say, by the way, can I just ask what pronouns you want me to use? And they'll be happy to give it to me.
Okay.
Right? I understand that it's easier to use they and them to begin with. However, it can also make people feel that they're being misgendered because they're not a they and them. They're either he or she or whatever. Okay.
That does make sense.
Yeah. And usually when let's say you and I are having a conversation and we were talking about you, friend, and I had
Nice things, I hope.
only the good way, only the positive things, and I had no idea what friend's pronoun is. I would just say friend's name.
Okay.
The other day when we did filming and with friend, and then friend said this and friend said that, and I just kept using it until someone actually told me, by the way, friend's pronoun is actually this. I'm like, okay. Or if I ask friend directly, by the way, friend, what's your pronoun? Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, that was great.
Yeah, it was helpful.
And we talked a little bit about stereotyping before and maybe the impact on kids if we're sort of stereotyping them or their gender. Can you talk to this, Dotahn or Budi, about, I guess, what is a stereotype to begin with?
Well, I think you mentioned the first or the common one is the blue and pink, right? Right. Blue's for boys, pink is for girls, and that's from before a baby is born. The clothes, your baby swaddling blankets or clothes that you buy, it's blue or pink. And so to me, that stereotyping is about a gender is only allowed to do this thing or this thing, and assigning specific rules based on gender, which are, to me, completely unnecessary.
Yeah. There's a lot of example about gender stereotypes. Those of the viewers who are watching us, you look at the three of us, and you can immediately just pick up the gender stereotypes from each one of us. Including myself, who's non-binary, play around with masculine and feminine. You can still pick certain gender stereotypes. The way I explain it to people in my work is by asking them to look around the room and name me the one obvious thing that is gender stereotype. And usually people say hair. Immediately. Yeah. Because as this is what people tell me. If you're a girl, then you are encouraged to have long hair. If you're a boy, you're encouraged to have short hair or no hair at all at times. Then I say, okay, great. What's the second one? Jewelry. If a man wears jewelry, they're still seen as being strange or being quirky or being, unique. if a woman doesn't wear jewelry, then there is immediately some immediate assumption about their sexuality, right? I'm like, okay, that's two. What's the third one? Clothing. Easy. Again, men's, women's, boys, girls section. Sometimes I just want to walk to a shop and just go, I just want something that fit and something in the color that I want. I don't care about the gender.
Where it's from.
Where it's from, yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, stereotypes can apply to other things that aren't a gender as well. I mean, there's a lot of stereotypes for age or...
Yeah, and because you mentioned age, this is why I keep challenging people. Because some people said to me, people from certain generation will just not going to be able to learn about all this gender stuff. And I just have to remind them that my parents is from that generation. And if I can have conversation with my parents about gender, they may not have the same level of depth the way I do. But if I can have conversation with them in order to build respect, why are we stereotyping a whole entire generation of being unable to learn about the idea of gender? The other stereotypes is about multicultural communities as well, where I'm part of, and you're part of it as well. Multicultural communities will just never understand this because they are inherently transphobic, homophobic, or whatnot. And I keep saying to them, you got one person here who's a member of multicultural communities, and the key is for us to find a way to communicate it that is actually relevant to their culture. And that is an ongoing, progress. Exactly. Like you with your parents is ongoing.
It is. Yeah. It's ongoing.
And how do kids learn stereotypes?
I've always wondered this. We found stereotypes popping up before my daughter had been in childcare even. Her play had been with, in controlled environments, people we knew, hadn't been exposed to much TV, and still would come with the pink kiss for girls, and it's so pervasive it's hard to pinpoint.
Yeah.
That's what I found.
That's true.
I mean, it's more pronounced once you get into school, I think, where you start to hear more, I guess, direct opinions from other people. But I would say stereotypes everywhere, by ourselves, by, books and clothing and...
And I think that's important to remember that kids aren't born with these stereotyped views that they do. Yeah, they pick them up. And what are some of the ways that parents and carers can, I guess, challenge these stereotypes with their children?
I think comes back to what you were saying before, because the challenge that I've found is we can challenge those stereotypes over and over, but if the rest of the world is reinforcing those stereotypes, the cut-through is difficult. I really liked what you said before around involving a wider community so that it's not just parent says this, the rest of the world says the opposite.
And having an honest conversation with the child as well. If a child says, your child or anyone's child says to you, I really want to wear this, but people tells me that I can't, then it is within our role and responsibility to inform that child that it is okay. Yeah. It's okay. No, that's fine. You want to wear a tutu, that's completely fine. And then they said, but how about this? People will make fun of me. And that's where you step up as a parent or a carer or a guardian. You step up. Yeah. You're like, well, what if I wear it with you? Yeah. What if I do it the same with you? Or, what if I play the same thing as you? That will give that child a sense of affirmation that what they like, what they want to do, even though the whole world telling them that's not for them, but to people that matters to them the most, it is okay. Yeah. So I think that's the easiest way to start challenging those stereotypes. Just having that courage and that bravery for us to tell ourselves, it is okay. It's okay. the world won't collapse on itself, right? I won't get 1,000 hate mails because no one know where I live, right? It is okay. It's okay. I can do this. Just focus on that child and really look after that child well-being. The child's well-being is they want to feel loved, they want to feel assured, they want to feel affirmed, they want to feel supported, and we give that.
Yeah.
Even that, if that makes us feel uncomfortable, that's our business to deal with.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. I think it's can be very challenging for us, but in recognizing how challenging it is for us, we're also identifying with how challenging it is for our child, and being able to be uncomfortable. It's small price to pay, I guess.
Yeah, and again, it's very contextual, isn't it? And sometimes, I'm just reflecting on the children that my nieces and my cousins once removed, and everyone else. Sometimes we do have to be honest with them and say, okay, well, you can do what you want in this house, but we also know that some houses are not like that. So how do you feel when you go to someone's house and they tell you that you can't do this, you can't wear this, you can't play with certain things? How do you feel about that? And how can we make you feel that you are okay or you are safe when you are visiting your friends and they have completely different way of doing to the way we do things? Having that honest conversation, and children can come up with some brilliant answers. Stuff that we don't even think about because we are so caught up in our little head. I remember my niece just told me and said, "Well, that's their house. I'm only there for a few hours."
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And I think there are so many great examples in the media now which challenge, gender stereotypes, or even just pointing out, celebrities or sports people that are directly challenging those stereotypes. I think is important just to show that example
Yeah,
for
other
children.
references.
Yeah, other references.
Yeah.
And I guess on the flip side, what is the potential harm if we're reinforcing those stereotypes, or we're not supporting our child to, I guess, be who they are?
I think the most harm is restricting a child's development and applying what we know of the world onto a child instead of letting a child explore it themselves. And the long-term impact of that, how a child understand themselves, how they see the world around them, and also how they interact with each other. So if we put a restriction, let's say a young girl wants to climb up the trees and wear overalls, and then we say, no, wear dresses and grow your hair long. If that's not who the child is, then the child will, from early on, will start thinking there's something inherently wrong with me because everyone's telling me that I can't be who I am. Then how that child interact with another child is because children learn from us, right? So if we say no to that child has the potential to say no to other people. Like, oh no, you can't do that. Then that start the bullying in the playground. Then that start the name calling because they learn it from us. Then later on, when they start growing up, we, just like the three of us, we are subconsciously reproducing that. We just keep reinforcing this idea of gender as having a binary, just male, female, masculine, feminine, and how that can actually create segregation in society. Because society progresses, there's transgender, diverse, non-binary people, but if their world is very much around that idea of two genders, then they will start attacking people who do not follow those two genders. That's the easiest way to explain the potential harm. The harm to the child themselves, the way they understand who they are, the harm to other people as well, and the harm to the broader society. So we have to start thinking about how can we stop the cycle? How can we start having that conversation and introducing the topic in a way that is not preachy, but in a way that is very easy to digest, even to a young child.
So say a 7 or an 8-year-old comes to their parent with a stereotyped comment like, she can't do that, she's a girl, she can't play that. Like, what's an example of a response you could have for that child that, I guess, challenges that stereotype?
I think for me, it's been about finding, those references to, people that have challenged those stereotypes, or cultural references which do challenge the stereotypes. Because otherwise it's the preachy parent. Examples for me have been the easiest part. My daughter very early came home from primary school saying my friend said that girls aren't allowed to marry girls, they're only allowed to marry boys. And I was able to use, examples of, yes, that was true once, but very recently, it's changed in Australia. You're a friend of the family is an example who, is married, two women are married. So those external, preferably, well-known references, I think help.
I was just trying to relate it back to my own story. So when I started embracing my gender, because it's quite recent, it's only in the past 5 years, I started growing my hair. And I remember my cousins once removed, so that's my cousins' children. They're about 6, 7-year-old. They're gorgeous, adorable, and they just look at me and were like, "But uncle, you're not allowed to have long hair because you're a boy." So the way I reacted was, "Okay, well, what makes you think that only a girl can have long hair?" In just having that conversation, and they start saying, "Well, because that's what we learned. That's what because all the girls here having long hair." And I'm like, "Okay, well, can you think of a boy that you've seen or that you like that has long hair?" And they started naming celebrities. Like, this guy. Oh, I know that cartoon or that video game character has long hair. And they just said, "Well, see, not long hair is not just for girls. Boys can have long hair as well." And it's just that subtle messaging of age-appropriate way by relating it to their world instead of trying to get them to understand our world. And I just like using that example because after we had that conversation, it just moved on to something completely different topic, right? Because child's attention span,
Yeah, and I think that's a great way to approach it, those sort of open, curious questions like, "Oh, what makes you think that?" Or "What can you tell me this?" And when they start saying it out loud, they probably realise, "Oh, I don't know actually why that's the case," and allowing them to explore that stereotype themselves and realising that there's not a concrete reason.
Yeah.
And I also like a believer that when a child says something or asks something, that comes from a place of genuine curiosity.
Yeah.
They probably haven't got the language to articulate it, so they just say it.
Which is why we love kids. Just say it how it is.
I say how it is, because they're probably curious, but they don't know how to be curious.
Yeah.
So they would say something like, "Oh, but a man and men can't get married." Right? Yeah. And part of that brain is actually thinking, why? And that's our role to start going, "Okay, well, let's think about this. Let's have a chat."
Being that sounding board and Great. Thank you both so much. We're now going to move on to our sex ed spotlight. So this is where a parent or carer from the community sends in a question and our guests help to answer. So we have a question today that comes in from the father of a child in year 1. He says, "The main conversation we are struggling with at the moment at home is about body image and gender identity. Unrealistic ideas of body image and gender stereotypes are already coming up in grade 1. I guess my question is how we as parents can empower our children with positive ideas of body image when gender stereotypes and unattainable ideas of body image are so pervasive." So that's an interesting one. So specifically about body image.
can relate to the example with their child in grade 1. The example that we had recently was our daughter came home and she was upset. And when I asked her why she was upset, she said, "Oh, I'm upset because I've got hair on my arms." And we had the discussion of, why are you upset about, hair? Everyone has hair on their body. And eventually worked out that kids at school were saying, you're a girl, you're not supposed to have hair. And we found it quite challenging. As parents, but I think we obviously role models in the way that we present ourselves and our bodies, and we like to think that we're fairly body positive, but we were unsure, aside from saying that's not right, that anyone can, how best to combat those kind of quite damaging, I guess, stereotypes.
Oh, it's tough, isn't it? It's a really difficult one because, again, my nieces, they also have pretty hair. And I'm just trying to remember what my sister-in-law said to them, and I can't remember it word per word, but I remember my sister-in-law shared with us, we started having that conversation about girls having hairy arms, and that it is okay for girls to have hairy arms because the human body is diverse. And they start saying, look at your dad, my brother, your dad is tall, your uncle is short, your dad, and that's starting that, having that conversation about understanding that there is no such thing as one human body, that human bodies are diverse, unique, and wonderful, and just starting instilling in them that other people may see you in a certain way, but if you look at yourself and you like what you see, that's the most important thing. Right? And again, encouraging the child to have the courage and the bravery to actually talk about these things to us because they trust us as that safe person. Not the one who's going to say, "Oh, no, they're just being stupid. Don't think like that." No.
It's hard not to say that sometimes. But yes.
Yeah, but really listen to them and being that trust person, that trusted person. I think that's the key. That's the only thing that I can think of at the moment.
Wonderful. Thank you both so much for joining us on this episode today. Where can our listeners find you, Budi?
Oh.
Or your work, if you want to be found.
If I want to be found, I'm not sure I want to be trolled. I like I said, I have my own agency. My agency doesn't focus on sexual health, but coming from a health promotion background and also a little bit with my research, I'm more than happy to talk about this kind of topic. So I got a website. It's, you know what, you just have to learn how to pronounce it. It's www.anandalearning.com.au, and you just get in touch.
You're all good, Dotahn.
I'm all good. Yeah, people don't need to find me.
Okay.
That's right.
Great. Thank you both so much for joining us. Great. For any resources we mentioned today, again, please go to the show notes. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Let's Talk. If you enjoy the podcast, please follow and share with your community. And you can find us on Instagram at its_justasec or online at itsjustasec.com. I'm Fran. Thank you for listening. And remember, it takes only just a sec to start these conversations.